Listen, darling, life ain't just a bowl of cherries. Sometimes, it's a plate of suspicious-looking scrambled eggs served with a side of intuition. And let me tell you something right now, when a woman's gut starts talkin', you better pull up a chair, pour a strong cup of coffee, and listen. Because that feeling right there, honey, that's the Holy Ghost sendin' you a text message when your man's number is busy. Good afternoon, beautiful people. For those who don't know, I'm Auntie May. I've been married, a time or two. I've seen things. I've felt things. And today, I'm gonna share a story about a breakfast that wasn't just food, it was a whole revelation on a plate. Now my third husband Clifford, God rest his soul because he's certainly not resting in mine, let me tell you that right now. He was a charmer of a man, could talk a stray dog off a meat truck and convince it to become a vegetarian. Had a smile that could light up a room and a work ethic that could let it stay dark for a decade. Lazier than a Sunday morning and twice as slow. For 15 solid years his contribution to the culinary arts in our home was a single consistent performance. He would roll over in bed hearing me move around, and without even opening his eyes he would declare in a voice full of gravel and false effort, "The coffee's on." And that was it. That was the summit of his domestic ambition. The coffee was indeed on because I had set the timer the night before. So you can imagine the cosmic shift in the very fabric of reality I experienced on that particular Tuesday morning. I shuffled into the kitchen the way I always did, my robe tied tight, my mind already ticking through the day's chores. The air should have held the simple lonely scent of that auto-brewed coffee. But it didn't. It was thick with the sizzle of pork fat and the sweet dusty smell of pancake batter. For a second I thought I had lost my mind, that the loneliness of a long marriage had finally conjured a phantom feast. But then I saw him. There he was, Clifford, my husband, standing at that stove like a captain at the helm of a ship he'd never sailed. He had an apron on, one of those novelty ones, a gift from a nephew, that said, "Kiss the cook," with an arrow pointing up. He'd never worn it before. It was too crisp, too new, looking like a costume. And he was whistling. Not a real song, just a meandering, aimless tune, the sound of a man trying very hard to project an air of casual normalcy. The whistle itself was a red flag. Clifford didn't whistle. He grumbled. He sighed. He made low groaning sounds when he got up from his chair. Whistling was for men with clear consciences and light hearts. Clifford's heart was many things, but light was not one of them. My eyes traveled from his stiff back to the counter. There was a bowl of batter, a carton of eggs, a package of bacon with 2 strips left in it. It looked like a stage set. Then I saw the plate. He had already plated 1 serving. 2 pancakes. And he had somehow painstakingly managed to shape them into lopsided asymmetrical hearts. They sat there slightly burned at the edges, oozing butter and syrup, a puddle of golden brown forming a moat around them. Next to them 2 strips of bacon were crossed, not like an X but like a careful, deliberate attempt at an asterisk. A sprig of parsley was perched on the side, a garnish plucked from the sad little plant I kept by the window that he always said was a waste of good window space. My first thought, I confess, was not a sweet sentimental, "I'll look at him," finally trying. Oh no, darling. My spirit, which had been lulled into a resigned rhythm by 15 years of predictable neglect, gave a violent lurch like an engine thrown into reverse. The alarms went off. Silent screaming bells in the deep places of me. My mind raced through the possibilities like flipping through a file of his past offenses. Was it our anniversary? No, that was in March, and this was a dreary October Tuesday. Was it my birthday? Gone and past. Had he forgotten something important I'd asked him to do? That was so common it wouldn't warrant a heart-shaped pancake, just a mumbled apology later. This was different. This was a production. I stood there in the doorway just watching him. He was concentrating so hard on flipping the next pancake heart, his tongue peeking out from between his teeth, a look of performative effort I'd seen him use when trying to assemble a bookshelf from instructions. This was labor for him. This breakfast was a task he was executing, not a joy he was sharing. The dissonance was deafening. The Clifford I knew considered pouring his own cereal a strenuous activity. The man who would call me from the living room to ask if we were out of remote control batteries while sitting 3 feet from the drawer where we kept them. That man was now wielding a spatula with the intense focus of a brain surgeon. And the silence between us was heavy. It wasn't a comfortable quiet. It was a waiting quiet. He knew I was there. I could see the muscles in his neck tense just a little, waiting for my reaction. He wanted a sound, a gasp of delight, a tearful thank you. He was fishing for a specific response to settle his own nervousness. That's when the cold feeling started in the pit of my stomach, a slow seep of ice water. This wasn't about me. This wasn't about nourishing me or surprising me with love. This was about him. This was about something he needed to accomplish. A gesture that was meant to placate or distract or perhaps even memorialize. My mind whispered the terrible thought, who died? Because such a break from character felt like a response to a death. Or the darker, more insistent whisper, what did you do? I thought about the late nights at work lately. The new cologne, a scent too sharp, too young for him. The way he'd started deleting his text history on his phone, claiming it was running slow. The extra cash he said he'd won in a casual poker game. Isolated incidents I had brushed off, folded into the laundry of a long marriage. But now they came tumbling back, each one a piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to assemble. And this breakfast, this bizarre, carefully constructed offering, was the final piece being forced into place. It was an apology for a sin I hadn't yet discovered. It was a performance of normalcy to cover a crack in our world. It was a guilt offering laid on the altar of the stove. Those heart-shaped pancakes weren't symbols of love, they were containment units for a secret. The bacon crossed not in love but in hopes of crossing something out. The whole scene was a lie served on my good china. And as I stood there, the smell that had initially seemed so inviting turned cloying and sickly sweet. The sizzle sounded like frantic whispering. The whistling was the sound of a man trying to drown out the voice of his own conscience. He finally turned and saw me, his face breaking into that wide, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mornin', sleepyhead," he said, his voice too bright, too early. "Thought I'd treat my best girl." And in that moment, looking at that plate, I knew. Whatever that treat was, it wasn't food. It was a clue, and I was not going to consume it. That plate he set down before me with a soft clink on the formica wasn't just a plate. It was a confession waiting to be read, a verdict served sunny side up. He placed it with such ceremony, such a careful, deliberate motion, like he was handling something fragile and sacred, the crown jewels of our crumbling kingdom. And I looked at it. The lopsided hearts bleeding syrup into each other. The bacon. Crosses. That sad sprig of parsley, a green lie on the white field of the plate. It should have been charming. It should have been a moment filmed in soft light for a sentimental movie. But it wasn't. It was all wrong. The presentation was too desperate. The effort was too visible. And my spirit, that inner compass that had guided me through 50-some years of men and mischief and Mississippi heartache, began to hum a low warning note, a vibration deep in my bones. My gut don't lie. It never has. My mama called it woman's intuition, a gift from God so we could navigate a world run by men with charming smiles and weak wills. My grandma called it the sense. You either have it or you don't. And honey, I have it. It's the feeling that makes the tiny hairs on your arm stand up for no reason you can see. It's the cold draft in a sealed room. It's the silence that falls over a party just before a glass breaks. And right then, sitting at my own kitchen table with the morning sun slicing through the blinds, that feeling wasn't a whisper, it was a shout. That food felt loud. It was screaming something my ears couldn't hear but my soul could translate plain as day. It was screaming guilt. It was screaming distraction. It was screaming, look here, look at this nice thing I made, don't look over there, don't look at the cracks, don't look at the shadows, don't look at the truth. I tore my eyes away from that screaming plate and I looked at him. Clifford, my husband of 15 years. He was hovering, his hands now empty, unsure what to do with themselves, finally shoving them into the pockets of that ridiculous apron. He was waiting for his praise. His smile was still plastered on, but it was like one of those smiles painted on a clown doll, too wide, too fixed. It didn't have any warmth in it. It was the smile of a man following instructions. Step 5, smile reassuringly. And his eyes. That's where the truth always is. The eyes are the windows to the soul, the preachers say, and they're right. Clifford's windows were shut tight, the blinds drawn. He wouldn't meet mine. He looked at my forehead, at my shoulder, at the clock over the stove, anywhere but directly into my eyes. A man proud of a genuine gift seeks your eyes to see the joy reflected in them. A man with a secret avoids them for fear you'll see the secret staring back. My Aunt Lula Bell, God rest her fiery soul, she knew men. She knew them inside and out. She used to sit on her porch shelling peas and dispensing wisdom like a queen on her throne. She'd say, "May child, a man is a simple creature most days. But when his conscience gets a toothache he gets fidgety. And a guilty conscience makes a man extra nice for no good reason, you can mark my words." I could hear her voice right then, clear as day, cutting through the smell of bacon and syrup. That's what this was. This was dental work for a guilty conscience. This whole production was a desperate root canal. He was trying to numb the pain of whatever he'd done by overdosing me on kindness. He was trying to fill the cavity of his betrayal with pancake batter and pig meat. I looked back at the plate. That's when the metaphor settled over me cold and clear. That plate was colder than his conscience. His conscience must have been a frozen block of ice, a glacier in his chest, to have conceived of this. Because this wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. You don't just wake up and decide to make heart-shaped pancakes. You need the idea. You need to look up how to do it, or at least try to remember from a cartoon. You need to pour the batter just so. This was premeditated niceness. And premeditated niceness in a lazy man is the most terrifying thing on God's earth. It means he has been lying awake thinking. It means he has calculated the risk and the reward. It means he has decided that this gesture, this plate of food, is the necessary price to pay to balance the scales for some other action. What could possibly be so heavy on the other side of those scales that it required 2 pancake hearts to lift it? The food began to feel sinister. The syrup looked too thick, like amber trying to trap me. The butter melting looked like something weeping. That sprig of parsley was the final insult, a pathetic attempt at normalcy, like putting a bow on a trash bag. This was our life, a thin garnish on top of something spoiled. He had broken the unspoken contract of our quiet, resigned marriage. We had an understanding. He would be lazily neglectful and I would be reliably resentful, and in that equilibrium there was a kind of peace. We knew where we stood. This breakfast shattered that. It was an upheaval, and upheavals are never good at our age. They don't bring new life, they expose buried rot. My gut churned, not with hunger but with a profound sense of danger. It was the same feeling I had the time I turned down a dark shortcut on a country road and felt the presence of something wrong before I saw the abandoned car. It was the feeling I had when my cousin Melvin talked too fast about a can't-lose investment opportunity. It was a primal knowing. This plate was the beginning of an ending. I didn't know what the ending was. I didn't know the shape of the betrayal. But I knew its scent, and it was the scent of that cinnamon he'd sprinkled on top, a spice he knew I didn't much care for. Even in his act of supposed love he couldn't get it fully right for me. There was a part of it that was for his own taste, his own idea of what a grand gesture should be. It was a performance for an audience of one himself, and I was just the prop. I knew I couldn't eat it. To eat that food would be to consume the lie. It would be to give my silent blessing to whatever sin had baked it into existence. It would be to let that syrup sweeten the poison he was asking me to swallow. My stomach closed up tight like a fist. This wasn't about food anymore. This was about survival. This was about listening to the oldest, deepest part of myself that said, "This is wrong, this is a trap, walk away." He was still standing there waiting. The silence stretched between us, elastic and tense. He needed me to play my part. He needed the grateful wife. He needed the narrative to complete itself. Careless husband redeems himself with breakfast, all is forgiven. But I was not a character in his story. I was the author of my own. And in that moment, my gut, my spirit, my Aunt Lula Bell's voice, all of it was telling me to tear the page out. So I didn't touch the fork. I didn't smile back. I just let the plate sit there between us, steaming its fragrant deceit into the kitchen air, a landmine on my checkered tablecloth. I was waiting too, waiting for a sign, for the next move, for the universe to show me what this was really about. And as if on cue, the doorbell rang. That doorbell ringing was a sound of divine punctuation. It was the period at the end of his sentence of a lie. It was a bell tolling for the end of something, though I didn't yet know what. In the thick silence of that kitchen, with that plate screaming at me and Clifford's fake smile fading into confusion, the chime was sharp and clean like a knife through butter. It broke the spell he was trying to cast. It was interruption. It was intervention. He jumped a little, the way guilty men do at sudden sounds. "Who on earth?" he muttered, more annoyed than curious. That annoyance told me everything. He didn't want an audience for his grand gesture. This performance was for me alone. An interruption spoiled the narrative. I didn't say a word. I just pushed back from the table, the legs of my chair scraping a sound of finality on the linoleum. I walked to the front door, my robe swishing around my legs, my heart doing a strange dance, not of fear but of anticipation. Like something was coming into alignment. I opened the door and there she was. Glenda, his secretary, standing on my porch in a crisp little dress too bright for a Tuesday morning, holding a manila folder like a shield over her chest. Her hair was done too perfectly. Her lips were a shade of pink I knew Clifford liked because he'd once bought me a lipstick in that color and seemed so disappointed when I never wore it. "Oh," she said, her eyes going wide like a startled deer. "Mrs. Henderson, good morning. I am so sorry to bother you at home." Her voice was a sugary syrup, even sweeter than what was on my plate. "Mr. Henderson left some absolutely urgent papers at the office and he just called and said he needed them signed before 10 and I told him I'd just run them right over." She thrust the folder toward me as if it were proof of her innocence. Now Glenda had always been a little too eager. A little too present. She called the house sometimes with questions that could have waited. She remembered his birthday with a card signed with just a little too many exclamation points. She had a laugh I'd heard once on the phone that was like tinkling glass, a sound meant to be noticed. I had folded these things into the background noise of a long marriage, a nuisance but not a threat. But this morning, seeing her here on my doorstep at this hour with her urgent papers and her wide eyes, something clicked. It was the final piece of the puzzle sliding into place with a soft, deadly sound. The late nights, the new cologne, the deleted texts, the heart-shaped pancakes. And now Glenda at my door before 9 o'clock. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a constellation, and it spelled out a story as old as time. I didn't even think. My body moved before my mind could catch up. That deep gut feeling that had been shrieking at me from the kitchen table took full control. It was a wave of knowing, a certainty that bypassed all logic. I turned away from her without a word. I walked back into the kitchen, my steps steady and sure. Clifford was standing by the table now, looking pale. He'd heard her voice. He knew. The folder in her hand was a prop, but it was a flimsy one. We all knew it. I went straight to that plate. The plate of his labor. The plate of his guilt. I picked it up. It was still warm. The syrup cooled and shifted. I turned and walked back to the front door where Glenda still stood framed in the morning light, looking confused and slightly offended. I didn't break my stride. I held the plate out to her right there on the threshold between my home and the world. "Clifford made this special," I said. My voice was calm, flat like the surface of a still pond. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't hostile. It was simply a statement of fact. "You look like you need it more than me." And I looked her dead in the eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just offered her that plate with its lopsided hearts and its crossed bacon and its pathetic parsley sprig. The look on her face. Oh honey, it was a masterpiece of confusion and dawning horror. Her eyes flicked from the plate to my face, then past me into the house, searching for Clifford. Her mouth, a perfect little pink circle of surprise, opened and then closed. She didn't know what to do. To refuse it would be rude, would be suspicious. To take it was to accept something she didn't understand. Her cheeks flushed a deep red that clashed with her dress. She was a woman caught in a script she hadn't rehearsed for. This wasn't the quick professional drop-off she'd imagined. This was domestic warfare, and I had just handed her a weapon made of breakfast food. And Clifford, I could feel him behind me in the hallway, a presence of pure panic. I didn't need to turn around to see it. The air grew thick with his shock. It was the silence of a collapsed lung. He had been so carefully orchestrating this morning, directing the play in his head. The loving husband makes breakfast. The wife is grateful. The guilt is assuaged. The secretary is a distant, separate issue. But I had just yanked the curtain down. I had brought the separate acts together on the same stage at the same time. I had connected the dots right in front of everyone. I had taken the symbol of his supposed love for me and offered it to the very reason he needed to prove that love in the first place. The poetry of it was brutal. It was an instinctual act of justice so perfect it took my own breath away. Glenda's hands fumbled. She had to set the manila folder down on my little porch table to take the plate. Her fingers touched mine for a second and they were ice cold. She held the plate away from her body as if it were radioactive. I couldn't, she stammered. Oh, I insist, I said, my voice still that terrifying calm. It was made with such special attention. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. Every word was a needle. Special attention. A shame to waste. She heard it. She heard all of it. The subtext was no longer sub. It was text written in syrup and served on a plate. She took it. What else could she do? She stood there on my porch holding that absurd plate, looking utterly lost, a secretary transformed into a waitress in a tragedy. Clifford finally found his voice from behind me. It was strained too high. May, why'd you do that? I made that for you. But the hurt in his voice wasn't the hurt of a rejected gift giver. It was the panic of a gambler watching his sure bet go up in smoke. It was the fury of a man whose meticulous plan has been ruined by a woman's uncanny intuition. If that breakfast had truly been about love, about me, he would have just been disappointed. He might have sighed and said, well, fine, more for me. He would have been hurt in a soft, quiet way. This was different. This was a sharp public wound to his agenda. He was shook. And a shook tree is always about to drop its fruit. As Glenda mumbled a thank you and turned to walk back to her car balancing that plate of doom, I knew the fruit was already in the air on its way down. I had just changed the course of everything by following a feeling. I had handed his sin right back to him, served on my good china. Glenda took that plate like she was accepting a live grenade. Her hands trembled just enough to make the syrup shiver in its little amber pool. She didn't look at me again. Her eyes, wide and scared, darted past me to where Clifford stood in the shadow of the hallway, a statue of dismay. She mumbled something that was neither words nor thank you, just a soft, shapeless sound of panic. Then she turned on her heel, those two bright shoes clicking a frantic retreat down my porch steps. She moved with a stiff, careful grace, the kind you use when you're trying not to spill something poisonous. She set the plate on the passenger seat of her little white car, a final absurd sight through my front window, and then she was gone. The engine started too loud for the quiet street and she pulled away, leaving nothing but the faint smell of her cloying perfume and the ghost of that breakfast hanging in the air. I closed the door slowly. The click of the latch was a period of full stop. It sealed the two of us back into the house, into the aftermath. The silence that followed was immense. It was a living thing pressing in from the walls, thick with everything that had just happened and everything that was still unspoken. I could hear the old refrigerator humming its one-note song. I could hear a dog barking somewhere down the block. I could hear the furious, frantic beating of my own heart, a drum against my ribs. I turned around to face him. Clifford had not moved. He was still planted in the doorway to the kitchen, his face a canvas of emotions fighting for dominance. Confusion was there, plain and simple. Why had I done that? What strange female logic was this? But underneath that confusion, swirling up like dark water, was something sharper, hotter. Panic. And beneath the panic, a raw red anger. He was trying to hold it all in, but it was leaking out at the edges, in the tight line of his jaw, in the way his hands had clenched into fists at his sides, then unclenched, then clenched again. May. His voice came out a strangled thing. Why'd you do that? I made that for you. The words hung there in the charged air. They were meant to be a rebuke, a wounded cry. But they landed all wrong. The tone was off. There was no soft center of genuine hurt in them. They were brittle and accusing. The emphasis was all on the you. I made that for you. The implication was clear. It was a bespoke offering, a custom-made guilt payment intended for a specific recipient. By giving it away, I had messed up the transaction. I had misdirected the freight. I just looked at him. I let the silence stretch, let it become a weight he had to carry. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't get defensive. I simply stood there in my robe, a spectator to his unraveling. My calm was a mirror and he couldn't stand what he saw reflected in it. That was just rude, May. He tried again, his voice gaining a little volume, a little force, trying to find the footing of righteous indignation. Glenda didn't need my breakfast. I slaved over that stove for you. I got up early. I thought. He trailed off. He thought what? That I would be so dazzled by the gesture that I wouldn't see the strings attached. That I would be so hungry for affection I'd swallow the whole performance without chewing. You thought what, Clifford? My voice was quiet, but it cut through his bluster like a blade. It was the first time I'd spoken since handing off the plate. He flinched. He wasn't used to me cutting to the chase. He was used to my sighs, my eye rolls, my long-suffering silences. This directness, this unnerving stillness was new territory. I thought it would be a nice surprise. He said, the anger winning out now, coloring his cheeks. A nice thing for my wife. And you just throw it in my face, give it to the first person who rings the doorbell like it's garbage. There it was, the wrong kind of hurt. If his heart had been pure in this, if this breakfast had been a true clumsy attempt at rekindling something, his anger would have been different. It would have been the frustration of a man whose gift is rejected. It would have been sad and maybe a little self-pitying. He might have gone quiet. He might have looked at the floor. He might have said, fine. I won't bother again. That's the hurt of wounded pride, of genuine effort spurned. But this was not that. This was the fury of a plan disrupted. This was the rage of a gambler who sees his sure bet snatched from the table. His eyes weren't wounded, they were blazing. His body wasn't slumped in defeat, it was coiled tight, ready to spring. He was hurt all right, but he was hurt because his calculation had failed. His investment of time and bacon and pancake batter had yielded no return. Worse, it had been transferred to another account entirely. The emotion wasn't, my wife doesn't appreciate me. It was, my cover is blown. The subtext of his anger was screaming now. Why couldn't you just play along? Why did you have to be so difficult? Why did you have to involve her? He kept talking, circling around the real issue, layering excuse over excuse. I just wanted to do something nice. Is that a crime? You're always saying I never do anything, and then when I do, you pull a stunt like this. Handing my food to my secretary. What must she think? Ah, there it was. The pivot. What must she think? His concern was already shifting from my feelings to Glenda's perception. He was worried about the narrative in her head. He was worried about the story she would tell herself about the strange wife who gave away a perfectly good breakfast. He was trying to manage the fallout in the wrong direction. I watched him pace a few steps in the narrow hallway, a caged animal. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure agitation. It's embarrassing, May. It makes you look, it makes us look. He couldn't finish the sentence. It makes us look like what? Like a couple in trouble. Like a husband whose gestures are so meaningless his wife pawns them off on the first passerby. He was shook. Truly deeply shook. His whole foundation, the careful facade of normalcy he'd been maintaining, was cracking, and he could hear the sound. A shaken tree doesn't just drop one piece of fruit. The whole orchard is vulnerable. Every secret, every lie, every late night and deleted text was trembling on its branch. And in his shaking I saw the truth as clear as if he'd shouted it. This wasn't about breakfast. This was about control. He had tried to control the narrative of his guilt by performing this act of contrition. He had tried to control my reaction by presenting this irresistible gift. He had tried to control the secret itself by burying it under a mountain of syrup. And I, with one simple instinctual act, had wrenched that control away. I had refused to be a character in his play. I had rewritten the scene on the spot. I had connected the dots between the guilty husband and the eager secretary right in front of God and everybody, and I had used his own prop to do it. His anger was the anger of a man who has lost the script. His panic was the panic of a man who sees the rest of the story unfolding in ways he can no longer direct. If this had truly been about love, he would have been confused and hurt, but the storm would have passed. He would have eventually shrugged and eaten the cold pancakes himself, grumbling about my ingratitude but secretly relieved he didn't have to keep up the act. He would have let it go. But he couldn't let it go. Because the act wasn't over. The performance had a second act, a third act, a terrible finale. He was now terrified, was rushing toward him because I had sent his leading lady away with a crucial piece of evidence. He stood there, finally silent, breathing hard, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his wife, the predictable, the reliable, the taken for granted. But as a force, as an obstacle, as a woman whose gut feeling was a more powerful compass than all his carefully laid plans. In that moment I knew for certain. The tree was shaken, the fruit was falling, and I didn't have to wait long to hear the thud. The quiet that settled in the house after his storm was a heavy, smothering thing. It wasn't peace, it was the pause between lightning and thunder. Clifford had retreated into the living room, a wounded animal licking its pride in the den. I stayed in the kitchen, not cleaning, not moving, just standing at the sink, looking out the window at the empty street where Glenda's car had been. The plate was gone from my table, but the ghost of it remained, a greasy smudge on the formica, a sweet sticky smell in the air. My gut, that relentless compass, was still humming its warning note, a low electric vibration in my bones. The drama wasn't over. Handing off that plate wasn't the end, it was the catalyst. I had set something in motion. I could feel it in the stillness, a gathering energy like the air before a tornado touches down. I didn't have to wait long. Not 30 minutes later the phone rang. The sound was a shriek in the silent house, a jagged tear in the fabric of our pretending. It was the old wall phone in the kitchen with a bell that could raise the dead. I let it ring twice. Clifford didn't move from the living room. He was pretending to read the paper, a fortress of false normalcy. I picked up the receiver. Hello. What came through the line wasn't a greeting. It was a chaos of sound. Gasping, wet, ragged, desperate gasps that hitched into sobs. A high, thin wheeze like air being forced through a blocked pipe. Then a voice, broken and terrified. Mrs. Henderson, it's Glenda. The words were slurred thick. I'm at Mercy General. The emergency room. Something's wrong. My hand tightened on the receiver. The cold feeling in my stomach became a solid block of ice. What's wrong, Glenda? My voice was calm, a flatline. I was a conductor waiting for the train to arrive right on schedule. I don't know. I started feeling funny in the car. My throat, it started to itch, then it started to close. I got so dizzy, I could barely breathe. I drove myself here, I don't even know how. She broke off into another fit of coughing, a horrible scraping sound. They're asking me what I ate. They said it's anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction, but I didn't eat anything. And then her voice dropped to a whisper of pure horrified realization. The pancakes. I ate the pancakes in the car. I was so nervous, I just ate them. The world narrowed to the sound of her wheezing breath over the phone line. The pieces, the jagged, ugly pieces of the puzzle Clifford had built, snapped together in my mind with an almost audible click. Glenda's allergy, Clifford's knowledge, the special spice. Glenda was deathly allergic to cinnamon. Not a little sniffle, a full-blown throat-closing, hives covering, anaphylactic shock kind of allergic. Clifford knew this. He knew it intimately. He had planned the office Christmas party the year before. Glenda had given him a typed list of her severe allergies, cinnamon, walnuts, shellfish, so he could order the food. He'd shown me the list, grumbling about how difficult people were. Who's allergic to cinnamon, for God's sake? He'd said. I remembered him tossing that piece of paper on the counter, his annoyance clear. He knew exactly what could happen. And he had sprinkled a love spice in those pancakes. His words from earlier floated back to me, a phantom whisper. He'd been so proud of that detail when he set the plate down. A little special spice just for you, sweetheart. He'd winked. A special spice. For me, a woman who thought cinnamon was just okay, a flavor for holidays, not for Tuesday breakfast. But for Glenda it was a death sentence. He hadn't been trying to kill Glenda. The universe isn't that simple, that clean. His evil wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at me. The breakfast was a murder weapon intended for this kitchen, for this table, for my mouth. But his plan, the plan born of a guilty conscience and a coward's heart, had backfired with a poetic speed that took my breath away. He had baked his betrayal into a breakfast, and I had instinctively redirected it to the very source of that betrayal. I had fed his sin back to his accomplice. The trap he'd set for me had snapped shut on the wrong person. They're giving me a shot, epinephrine, Glenda gasped, her voice fading. They said if I'd been alone any longer. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The image was clear. Her in her little white car, pulled over on the side of the road, gasping for air that wouldn't come, her vision tunneling as her own body turned against her because of a love spice meant for another woman. The horror of it was so vast it felt quiet. Did you tell them about the pancakes? I asked, my voice still that terrifying calm. I had to. They needed to know. I told them my boss's wife gave them to me. That my boss made them. Her voice broke. Mrs. Henderson, why would he? She couldn't form the question. The question was too big, too monstrous. Why would he use cinnamon? Did he forget? Did he not care? Or did he mean to? But I knew. He didn't forget. A man making a grand gesture, a heart-shaped apology, doesn't forget a fatal allergy of the woman he's involved with. He uses that spice because it's his favorite. Because it's part of his idea of a treat. Because in his arrogant self-centered calculation the breakfast was for me. Glenda's allergy wasn't a factor in my breakfast. Her existence, her very body, was irrelevant to his plan. She was an afterthought, a separate problem. The poison wasn't meant for her. But poison doesn't care about intention. It only cares about biology. I heard commotion on her end, a nurse's voice, firm and professional. "I have to go," Glenda whispered. And the line went dead. I stood there holding the buzzing receiver. Then slowly I placed it back in its cradle. The click was final. I turned. Clifford was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had heard my side of the conversation. He had heard the name, Glenda. He had heard, emergency room. All the color had drained from his face. He was the shade of old ashes. His eyes were wide pools of pure unadulterated terror. Not concern. Terror. The kind of terror that freezes the blood. He knew. He knew exactly what had happened the moment he heard, allergic reaction. His mind had made the connection faster than mine. Cinnamon. Pancakes. Glenda. The equation solved itself in the split second of my silence. "What?" he croaked. "What is it?" He was still trying to feign ignorance, but his performance was shattered. The mask was off. All that was left was the raw, naked fear of a man who has just seen his own devil's bargain come due. I looked at him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stated the fact, the verdict. Glenda's in the hospital. She's in the emergency room. She ate the pancakes. Clifford. The pancakes you made for me with your special spice. The cinnamon. The word hung in the air between us. Cinnamon. It wasn't a spice anymore. It was an accusation. It was a weapon. It was proof. He didn't deny it. He didn't say, "Oh my God, I forgot." He didn't rush for his keys to go to her. He just stood there, paralyzed by the consequences of his own actions. His plan to soothe his guilt, to perhaps even remove the obstacle of his wife, had spiraled out into a public, chaotic medical emergency involving the other woman. His secret was no longer a private sin. It was in a hospital chart. It was on the lips of nurses. It was in Glenda's terrified mind. His careful world of lies and lazy neglect had exploded, and the shrapnel had hit the one person he was trying to protect alongside himself. His face crumpled. It wasn't remorse for Glenda's suffering. It was the collapse of a man realizing he has lost everything in one stupid, arrogant move. He had tried to poison me. And he had failed. But in failing he had exposed the entire rotten structure of his betrayal. The truth didn't come out in a shouted confession or a discovered letter. It came out scrambled in a syrup of unintended consequences. The universe had taken his murderous intent and rerouted it, delivering a devastating lesson instead of a death. I had been the conduit. My bad feeling, my refusal to eat, my instinct to hand that plate to Glenda, it had all been a part of a justice larger than myself. He had tried to kill me, and instead he had handed me the one piece of evidence that would forever break his power. I knew. And now Glenda knew. And soon enough everyone would know. The truth was out. It was wheezing in an emergency room bed. And it was never going back in the bottle. So what's the moral, babies? You don't go through a fire like that and come out without some scars and some wisdom burned into your soul. The ashes of that Tuesday morning settled, and I sifted through them. I found pieces of myself I'd forgotten, pieces of him I'd never known, and a whole new understanding of how the world really works when the polish rubs off. First and always, you got to trust that inner voice. That gut feeling, that cold draft in a closed room. That's not you being paranoid or crazy or a suspicious old woman. That's your guardian angel whispering. That's the part of you that's still connected to everything, that sees the threads between things before your logical mind can weave the pattern. My Aunt Lula Bell didn't call it intuition for nothing. It's an intuition, a teaching from within. It's God's way of giving you the answer key when you're handed a test you didn't study for. I ignored that hum for years, the low-grade unease about late nights and new colognes. I chalked it up to the melancholy of a long marriage. But that morning it wasn't a hum, it was a scream. And I listened. I didn't understand why, I just knew I could not eat that food. To have eaten it would have been to silence that voice forever, to tell it was wrong. You do that a few times and the voice stops talking. You become deaf to your own salvation. So you protect that voice. You feed it with your attention. You let it guide you even when it makes no sense. Because that voice knew before I did that the plate was a lie. That voice saved my life, not from death maybe, but from a different kind of death, the death of living inside a man's lie and calling it a home. Second lesson, plain as day. If a man changes his routine overnight, there's a storm behind that sunshine. People are creatures of habit, especially men set in their ways. Clifford's routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Grumble, coffee, newspaper, armchair. A deviation that big, that dramatic, is never just a whim. It's a symptom. It's a geyser building pressure before it blows. A lazy man doesn't become industrious out of the blue. A neglectful man doesn't become attentive without a reason. The reason is almost always a guilty conscience or a desperate cover-up. That sunshine he's suddenly shining on you isn't warmth, it's a spotlight meant to blind you to what he's doing in the shadows. When the treatment changes suddenly, ask yourself what disease he's trying to cure. He wasn't trying to make me happy. He was trying to make himself feel better. He was trying to build a memorial of kindness to lay over the grave of his betrayal. That breakfast wasn't nourishment, it was a distraction, a shiny object to keep my eyes off the wreckage he'd made of our vows. So you watch for those changes, baby. The unexpected gifts, the uncharacteristic chores, the sudden interest in your day. It's not romance. It's often repair work on a crack in his own character. And you are not the foreman of that job. You're just the building he's trying to keep from collapsing on his head. But the third lesson, the biggest one, the one that still gives me chills, is this. Sometimes God uses the very trick a person sets for you to expose them. The universe has a sense of irony so sharp it can cut you clean in two. Clifford's evil, his small cowardly evil, was in that spice jar. He thought he was being clever, layering his gesture with a flavor he liked, a secret within a secret. He built a trap, a beautiful sweet-smelling trap. And I, without even knowing the mechanism, stepped around it. I didn't spring it. I picked it up and handed it to the person helping him set it. I didn't know about the allergy. I just knew that plate belonged to her. That was the divine hand at work. That was the rerouting. His own poison, his own chosen instrument of deception, became the evidence of his guilt. He meant to harm me, and he harmed his own co-conspirator. The sin traveled down the path of his betrayal and bit the hand that held it. That's not coincidence. That's justice. That's the cosmic ledger balancing itself in the most brutal, poetic way. You don't have to seek revenge. You just have to get out of the way and let a person's own wickedness trip them up. They will. They always do. They build their own gallows. They mix their own poison. Our job is just not to drink it. Our job is to have the discernment to see the trick for what it is and the courage to let it play out on the stage they built. I lived to tell the tale without a single bite. That's the part that stays with me. I didn't consume an ounce of his deception. My body, my spirit remained clean of it. I didn't have to wrestle with the horror of being personally poisoned. I watched the consequences unfold from a place of terrible clarity. I was a witness, not a victim. That's a powerful place to stand. It means you're still intact. Your trust in yourself is solid because you listened. Your soul isn't tangled up in the why, because the evidence presented itself in a hospital room. There was no long drawn-out investigation, no tearful confrontations where he might have gaslit me into doubt. The truth was immediate, medical, and undeniable. Anaphylaxis doesn't lie. So I was spared the second poison, the mental one, the maybe I'm wrong, maybe I overreacted, poison that kills so many women slowly. I got the clean break. The jagged, undeniable break. So the next time something don't feel right at your table, don't just eat it to be polite. Politeness has killed more women than frankness ever will. We're raised to be pleasant, to not make a scene, to swallow our discomfort along with the cold food and the lukewarm gestures. We're taught to value harmony over truth. But your peace is the most important meal of the day. You cannot run on the fuel of disrespect and deception. You cannot nourish your spirit on scraps of affection thrown from a guilty hand. Protect your plate. It's more than a piece of china. It's your boundaries. It's your intuition. It's your life. You have every right to look at what's being served to you and say no thank you. You have every right to hand it right back or give it to the cat or drop it in the trash. You owe no one the consumption of their lies. Clifford's breakfast was the last thing he ever made for me. The kitchen after that was mine again. Quiet, peaceful, the only sound the honest percolation of my own coffee. And let me tell you something about eating toast in silence that you made for yourself. It tastes like freedom. It tastes like truth. And it will keep you alive and whole long after the fancy poisoned plates have been cleared away.